Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Public Record Office of Northern Ireland, or PRONI as we are often better known. As Stephen said, I'm David Huddleston. I'm the Acting Director of PRONI and Deputy Keeper of the Records of Northern Ireland. If this is your first time in this wonderful archive building, you're especially welcome. Thank you for coming along today and supporting this event. I appreciate we're a really full house, and I appreciate just everybody being patient with us. It may take a little bit longer as we run through the event today. Just to say a little bit about PRONI and Éamon Phoenix. PRONI is the custodian of the community memory of this place, of Northern Ireland and its people. And it was somewhere that Dr Éamon Phoenix spent a significant amount of time, both here in Titanic Quarter and in our previous office in 66 Balmoral Avenue. He was a very frequent visitor to the Public Record Office in Balmoral Avenue as well. PRONI marked its centenary last year during 2024, and it was back in the closing event in March 2024 that I reflected that there was one noted public historian who would have had much to contribute to the centenary and is greatly missed, and that's Dr Phoenix. Éamon was dedicated to the cause of connecting our society with its history by engaging, informing and inspiring people from all backgrounds and all walks of life. It was his deeply held conviction that understanding the past was essential to moving us forward as a society, and this was the driving force behind his quest to make history accessible to everyone. He left a profound legacy about the importance of archives and the contribution that archives can make in helping us know ourselves as well as each other. Back in March, I was pleased to note that Éamon's family and colleagues and friends were setting up a foundation to ensure his legacy, and that PRONI looked forward to working closely with the foundation. So I am delighted that 8 months on, here we are today in the Public Record Office in PRONI, being able to host the launch event and to see us at absolute maximum capacity. I don't think we've ever had so many people in this room. Please don't tell any of our health and safety people about the numbers in this room. And if there's a fire exit, we will manage that obviously very carefully. So I think it's a real testament to the foundation and to Éamon that we see such a fantastic turnout today. On that note, I want to thank the foundation and especially Alice and Mary Alice Phoenix in helping to organise the event, and also to thank all of today's contributors, Alice herself, Dr Martin Manser, Paul Connolly, Damien Maddalena and Muriel Moore. Gordon Lyons, MLA, Minister for Communities, is not able to be here in person for today's event due to other diary commitments, but he has sent a special video message, and we're now going to play that video.
Good afternoon. As Minister for Communities, I am also Keeper of the Records of Northern Ireland. I'm delighted that the Dr Éamon Phoenix Foundation website is being launched at PRONI. Unfortunately, I cannot be with you today to celebrate Éamon's life. However, I wanted to acknowledge and honour his enduring legacy as an historian and communicator that resulted in him becoming a household name. It is particularly appropriate that this launch takes place at the Public Record Office, as Éamon was very much the voice of the archives, where he reported on the release of state papers and government files for over 30 years. Dr Phoenix left his mark as a teacher, as an historian, as a public speaker, and as a political commentator. He was a long-standing contributor to the Irish News and was equally well known for his many appearances on the BBC, most recently the Year 21 podcasts that marked the centenary of Northern Ireland in 2021. Éamon was also a standard bearer for reconciliation and helped nurture an understanding of the difficult centenaries that took place between 2012 and 2022. It is a tribute to his achievements in this sphere that the Community Relations Council awarded him the Good Relations Award in 2022 for being an inspirational local peacemaker. As a minister with a keen interest in history and heritage, I'm delighted to add my support for the Foundation's aims to promote the study of history as a way of fostering a deeper understanding of the past and promoting reconciliation. I wish you all a very successful launch event, and I look forward to exploring the website. Thank you.
I want to thank you for your attention, and obviously I just acknowledge the sentiment and the message that the Minister expressed there in terms of Éamon's contribution. I'm now going to hand over to Alice Phoenix, who's going to give her contribution in terms of today's launch event. Thank you. I'll now hand over to you, Alice.
First of all, I want to thank you all for coming here today. It's so lovely to see everyone. I also want to thank the Minister, Gordon Lyons, for taking the time to make that video when he couldn't come. We much appreciate that. I also have a list of people that I want to thank. And first and foremost, I want to thank the Foundation members, the Foundation trustees. These were all people that were friends of Éamon's. They all worked with Éamon in the areas of education, history and reconciliation. They are people who come with very vast experiences and very high level of skills, and without them we wouldn't have been able to get this whole foundation off the ground, and I really thank you. I'm also delighted about that our patron is Dr. Mansur, that he's here today, but I'm not actually going to speak about him now, as I will talk about him later on. The other people that I want to thank today is Paul Conley of Smart Videos and Damien Madalena, who both of them worked on the website and the archives. Paul Conley, once again, was someone that worked with Éamon on different projects. The very last project that Éamon and Paul worked on together was Cluna House. And Cluna House was a project where they were establishing history trails throughout Polglass. The aim behind this was to help people to have more concern about their, more respect for their area and the interesting history there was. But what Éamon particularly liked about this project is, ultimately, they were going to train some of the local young people to become tourist guides. And already Éamon had stretched out to another big house on the other side of the Belfast, in the hope that then they could begin twinning together. And unfortunately that wasn't to be. I also want to thank Rose McCullough, who maybe you didn't get a chance really to hear very well today. Rose was playing the harp outside, and Rose is a former All-Ireland champion as regards the harp, and also an whole Great Britain champion. So once again, high level of expertise there. The other person that I want to thank here publicly, because I probably would never get another chance to do it again, and she'll probably die when I call her name out, is Geraldine Harvey. Geraldine Harvey, down through the years, was Éamon's audio typist. And I don't know, Geraldine is here somewhere. I saw her on the way in, but I didn't get a chance to speak to her. Geraldine, you know, Éamon would do a lot of his stuff on the recorder, and then we would take the tapes over to Geraldine. This had been going on for nearly 40 years. She did especially all the Irish news work. You can guess how long it was going on. When we started off, we both had children, then we had people at university, then we had people that had jobs, then we had people who had children, and then we both ended up as grannies together. So this has been going on for a very long time. Geraldine, I just want to say here publicly, Éamon and I appreciated you so much. You were always there, you never let us down, and your work was so highly skilled. Thank you, Geraldine, very much. I want to give her a clap. As you all know, most people here knew Éamon. Éamon was a broadcaster, a teacher. He was you know, he was a lecturer, he was into education and everything. The key thing about Éamon was he was never he was always fair-minded and never biased. That was the key thing about Éamon. And that was the one thing that everybody from both communities liked. They liked to have someone that could talk to them about history and that they really trusted and felt safe with. And the other thing about Éamon was that he brought warmth and insight into his meeting of people. He genuinely liked people. He loved people. He loved people to talk to. He liked that very much. He often came home to me because people come up to him after the meetings and things and say, tell him their story. And Éamon would take whatever they said to him, listen to it, treat them with respect, and take that little bit of history that they gave to him and put it into the big jigsaw of history. And that was the other aspect of Éamon that people really loved. When I first met Éamon, he was very much involved in the West Belfast Historical Society. And even though he was very young, well, he was young at the time compared to a lot of the other people in the Historical Society. He eventually became the chair, and then in later years he became the president. So every January, when there was the release of the declassified state papers, in that January meeting, Éamon would always get up and talk to everyone about them. And the West Belfast Historical Society, under Patrick Greer, who's another one of our trustees, they had a huge big buffet meal at this, which they invited people from all the different historical societies out across Northern Ireland. Therefore, it was very much a cross-community event. But not only did they do that there, they also invited Larry Breen from the South, who was there for the foundation of local historical societies down there. They brought all those people up here too. So not only was it cross-community, but it was cross-border. Now, this is excellent, and I certainly can say that we in the foundation will try to support them and encourage this as much as we can. This still continues, and they have been very lucky for the last 2 years that Sam McBride has stood in Éamon's place. This meeting from now on in January is going to be a memorial one to Éamon, and I'm very honoured by that. And also, they have made me their president, which I'm not so sure about. But God love them, they have. I just want to talk very quickly then about Éamon's role in education, because Éamon was an educator. And it's one of the reasons that when he was talking to people, he could take very difficult, contentious issues in history and break them down and explain them. Éamon, well, after he qualified and all, he did 1 year in St Mary's up in the Glen Road, which is his old alma mater. He went to the Queen's. He was a junior fellow there. Then we all went down to St Michael's. He taught in St Michael's down in Enniskillen. And when he was there, he took a group of boys from Petora and a group of boys from St Michael's, and he entered them in to the UK Hansard competition. And the UK Hansard competition was to make a radio programme. And Éamon chose the topic, the Border Commission for Fermanagh. And they won. And I remember then we hosted all the boys from Petora and all the boys from St Michael's in our house, and I remember bringing them all their dinners in, and there was Éamon sitting at the top of the table, and I suddenly thought, oh God, I miss his chips. So he was there. He then moved back to Belfast. He moved to St Malachy's. How can I sum up his tales in St Malachy's? I'll do it very briefly. I'll just talk about Slugger O'Toole. What did Slugger O'Toole say about Éamon in St Malachy's? Boys who were mitching actually came back in for Éamon's history class. Now, I was nearly 35 years in teaching. That never happened to me. But let's be honest, who else did it happen to, like in fairness, After St Malachy's, he did a year in St Mary's University College, which he absolutely loved, and I can see a lot of his ex-colleagues here today. He then moved to Stranmillis, where he went into the history department with George Beale, who's also here today. And George and Éamon prepared the history students for their BEds. And when the external examiners came in to look at the work that both George and Éamon did, they said, looking at the research and the dissertations that they did with the students, this is what the external examiners said: these are not at BEd level, they're at a master's level. And that was the work that was coming from George and Éamon in that department. Then Éamon became the head of lifelong learning in Stranmillis when there was a changing of the positions. In lifelong learning, he made all the whole program. I'm sorry, there's something wrong. Is that me or is that the? Is it me? Okay, maybe it's me. I'm talking to this. Okay, thank you. Then he came head of lifelong learning in Stranmillis, and there he proposed all the program for all the different courses that there was. Then on top of that there, he took history classes himself, sometimes with, once again, the other historian, Jimmy McDermott, who's one of our trustees, is on the board here. And then came the famous Walkabouts Belfast. That absolutely, I don't know how many times I've been stopped by people and said, oh God, those were brilliant. Because people not only love going around hearing about all the history, they also loved the fact that there was always a lovely break for scones and tea. And there, friendships were made and everything. And people loved that there. Also, Éamon, being Éamon, loved music. He really loved music. And Muriel Moore then began to bring along her flute. And she played a lot of these here walkabouts around Belfast. And these were so magical. Could you just imagine hearing the flute playing all those songs and tunes in a place like the Assembly Building? Well, the good news for you is that Muriel's going to play for you today, and you will be able to hear all this here, and you'll be able to enjoy it. And if you want, you can close your eyes and pretend you're in the Assembly Buildings, so you can. Éamon also, I want to say before I leave Stranmillis, to thank them for setting up the annual memorial lecture to Éamon. I really appreciate it. The second one is coming up in January. It'll be on our website, and trust me, we will be advertising it too. In 2009, Éamon was the first chair of the Edmund Rice Schools Trust here in Northern Ireland. There was already one in the south. It is an organisation that supports Christian Brothers schools. He was the first chair, and last year he posthumously received the Edmund Rice Medal for Education, and that meant an awful lot to our family, so it did. The next thing I want to talk about is our connection with the Irish News. I nearly feel like saying there was this other person in our marriage, because the connection with the Irish News lasted 40 years, and I was 42 and a half years married to Éamon, so it went on for a very long time. Éamon always quoted the Derry-born historian F.S.L. Lyons, who said that to understand the past is to cease to live in it. And this meant so much to Éamon. He said that this guided him in everything that he did, that he was always trying to, and I find this word, taking the myths out of history. It's supposed to be the myth, I can't say it, but taking the myths out of history. So it's not surprising, therefore, that in the 1980s, the late Jim Fitzpatrick, who was then chair of the Irish News, invited Éamon to become involved in it. Jim himself was a very principled individual, and what a lot of people probably don't know about him is that behind the scenes he was one of the unsung heroes who worked very hard and ardently to promote the peace process here in Northern Ireland. Jim shared Éamon's viewpoint, and they both agreed that one of the ways of trying to promote peace and reconciliation was to have a balanced and fair-minded approach to history. So, when the Éamon was the editor of the book, and I just get the name completely right here. And also, I want to give you a quote from Jim. Sorry about this. Just give me 1 minute. This would never have happened to Éamon. Like, let's be honest. Let's be honest about this here. You know. Sorry, I've lost the page here because I want to give the quote from Jim Fitzpatrick, and I have these numbered, and I must have numbered them wrong. Éamon was the editor of the book A Century of Irish Life, and it was the history of the Irish news too. Éamon was the editor of it, and he was also the wrote about the history of the Irish news in it. Sorry, I wanted to give Jim's quote in this here because he quotes in the foreword of the book, and sorry, just give me 1 minute here. And what actually he said was this here, and I'm going to paraphrase now. What he was saying is that this volume, because it was an accurate representation of history and all, would be a tool as moving peace and understanding forward. And there. So when Éamon came into the Irish news, he, for example, if there was any very editorials at a very critical time, such as the declaration, declaration of either the Good Friday Agreement or the Downing Street Agreement, Éamon would always be called in to do the editorial, because he was able to take this here complex situation and explain it in very simple terms, once again, to people. He also had the column On This Day, which was very, very popular. He also did the declassified state papers, and he did declassified state papers, and these also appeared. And of course, once again here, you were getting this interpretation of history that was accurate and fair. I'm sorry, I'm going to go back a bit on myself, which I shouldn't do here, but I want you to hear the quote from Jim Fitzpatrick. He said, he was talking about the century of Northern life, and he said in his foreword, by contributing to a greater understanding of our shared past, this volume will make a positive contribution to the peace process. And that is what I was saying there already. Éamon and Jim's and the papers viewpoint completely overlapped, and that Éamon was fully on board what the paper wanted to do. Now, because of Jim Fitzpatrick's insistence on this very high-grade history in the paper, we are now in a situation that the Irish news possesses a great absolute repository of all this history, and they've been very kind and give us access into it. And you'll see on the website there is some on this days. There are some examples of the declassified state papers. What we would hope to do in the foundation is, and I know that Paul Connolly is in discussions with them, is that we would have On This Day released continuously, either daily or weekly, on the website. Now, my understanding is the big problem is technology, but I have every confidence in Paul that he will get this sorted. Because Éamon was fair-minded and unbiased in his approach, Éamon was very heavily used by the media to comment on different situations. He also, if there was a royal visit here, he would either meet with members of the royal family, or sometimes he would be the commentator there. Now, a number of years back, Éamon was approached and said, if Queen Elizabeth II dies, are you prepared to fly over to England and be one of the commentators? Éamon said, yes, of course, there's no problem. In June 22, he also said the same thing. If Queen Elizabeth dies, are you prepared to come over and be a commentator? Éamon says, of course, there's no problem. But unfortunately, just as Queen Elizabeth died in September, Éamon had got his own diagnosis. So the only thing that he was able to do was have an interview with Mark Simpson of BBC in our back garden, where he talked about Queen Elizabeth. So he did. The centenary, the decade of centenaries was something that Éamon became very heavily involved in. I'm not going to talk about the Taoiseach's expert advisory committee because of course we have the vice chair here, so there would be no point in me talking about it. But and also Éamon was a member of the famine committee down south, although retired before he died. But I'm not going to go through all the ways that Éamon was involved in the decade of centenaries up here in the north, because it would just take so long. Therefore, I've chosen just a few of the things that he was involved in, and that doesn't mean that any project or any organisation that I have left out, that they should feel that they were not as good as the ones I'm mentioning. It's not that I have to cherry pick. I have to cherry pick about which ones. Of course, the obvious ones is the Community Relations Council. Éamon started there in 2010, before the beginning of the decade, and then he worked with them drawing up principles, and there was a series of Community Relation Council's lectures, and we have those on video in the archives. He also was awarded, as David was saying earlier on, I actually think it was the minister was saying, he was awarded the Good Community Relations Award in 2022, in about March that year. Another group that he was involved in, and I'm just choosing them one, is the Tara Centre, which was in Omagh. And the Tara Centre was set up by Maura Tuhi and Mary Daly. And it is set up for people with trauma. It's set up for people with trauma, not just the trauma of the Omagh bomb, but any type of trauma that people may have in their life. And it provided a whole lot of holistic therapies for people and everything. But then what happened was, one of the people that came regularly to their centre attended, Éamon gave an inter-church talk up in Omagh. And they came back to the centre and they said, you know what, there might be actually another approach to healing as well as what we already have. And we think that this man could come in and he could take classes here. So Éamon came to the Omagh class, and with people from all communities there, a little bit of frostiness at the beginning, but by the time Éamon finished, he had them all sitting around tables, all together, talking and laughing and going through issues. And the Tara Centre was so clever what they did. They had his dinner waiting on him every week. So that meant he'd come back and say, well, lovely curry I got this week. Evidently I didn't feed him, but they knew the way to a man's heart, didn't they? But anyway, another thing that Éamon took part in was the fantastic podcast series that was Year 21. Éamon worked with Declan Harvey and Tara Mills. It is absolutely brilliant, and we have it on in our archives. And so we have it there. And number 48 on it, I have to say this one in particular, is called The Phoenix, and it's all about Éamon's two grandfathers, one who was in the UVF and was killed at Thiepval, and the other one was in the Irish Engineers, and he was very, very badly injured in the Dardanelles. He came back to Belfast, and within a matter of 5 or so years he ended up permanently in hospital. But he actually lived long enough for us to bring our daughter Mary Alice up to meet him. So he did when she was a baby, and that was in the 80s. I'm not going to say which one year specifically, because I know when people give my age I'm very angry, but anyway. I think I've covered a lot of the points that I wanted to make about Éamon. His legacy lives on. I certainly wouldn't like it to be lost. Just as Jim Fitzpatrick's legacy lives on, because the mantle of the work that he did, striving for peace, striving for fair minded representation of the news, because Jim realised that today's journalism is tomorrow's source of history. And as I've already said, it is there in the Irish News. And Jim's legacy was carried on through his family. His mantle fell upon him. They ably and willingly took it up. So it is continuing today. And so equally, I would like to help Éamon's legacy to continue, because it is so important for us that everything we do aims at reconciliation and peace. Thank you. I wasn't going to talk about Dr. Manser when I was talking about the rest of the trustees. Dr. Martin Manser agreed to become our patron. I was so overwhelmed by this because Éamon held him in such high esteem. So he did, and I knew that he still hadn't lost his interest in the North, because when Éamon was up there launching the gallery of politicians' photographs up in Stormont, there was Dr. Manser, and that was in 22, so it was. Dr. Manser, we could talk about him, and I could glibly tell you about how he influenced Fianna Fáil's policies down the years, how he was the back channel in promoting the peace regards, back channels to help to remove guns out of the situation, and how he also was a member of the Southern Government's committees when they went to talk about the Downing Street Declaration and the Good Friday Agreement. So he has this incredible resume, but sometimes I wonder, when you roll something like that off your tongue, this is what he did, this is what this is what happened. Sometimes I wonder, do we really appreciate what exactly that means? Because I'm old enough, I know you'll not believe this, to remember what it was like when Belfast was surrounded by a ring of steel, and you had to be searched going into Belfast, you had to be searched going into the shops. Every night you sat and watched TV, and there was all these dreadful assassinations, all these bombings, terrible things. And people like Dr. Manser behind the scene were working there over 20 years, carrying the torch. I regard it as carrying a light through the awful darkness that we were in, until we all started to follow that light and we came out into peace. So not only is our foundation a great debt to Dr. Manser for agreeing to become our patron, everybody here has a debt to Dr. Manser, because we now can go into the town to shop normally like anybody else, and we are not living in this awful darkness. I'm now going to ask Dr. Manser up to speak. Thank you very much, Dr. Manser.
Alice, thank you very much for your kind words. Mary Alice, family members, members of the Éamon Phoenix Foundation, Joint Irish Secretary, ladies and gentlemen. It's a real honour for all of us here today to have this opportunity to celebrate the life and work of Dr. Éamon Phoenix, but also to welcome the securing of his legacy for the benefit of future readers and scholars through his website and archive. We should all be grateful to his wife Alice, the family, and the Éamon Phoenix Foundation for their important initiative. Mind you, I wish I could show my wife Éamon against his library, as that might sort of bring more perspective to the books that I possess. And of course I have my father's library as well. Éamon, who was such a prolific historian, as well as a judicious and an entertaining one, spent many hours in this state-of-the-art building. and some of the items on the website relate to papers held here. I would like to thank the director, Dr David Huddleston, and his staff for their hospitality today, and for the many ways they, with others, have facilitated the assemblage of the website and archive, which will be further added to in the future. I too am glad to be a PRONI ticket holder. This public record office is, of course, the repository of documents since the creation of Northern Ireland. But it also hosts many papers relating to the whole of Ireland, preceding partition 100 years ago, and indeed since. Partition was not a clean cut archivally or any other way. As we know, the blowing up of the forecourts and the incineration of most of the public record office in Dublin at the start of the Irish Civil War, about which figures as diverse as Ernie O'Malley and Winston Churchill were remarkably complacent, inflicted far more damage on the country's archives than partition. And indeed, there is an important project underway as a legacy of the decade of centenaries, an attempt to reconstruct and reconstitute, with the help of many other institutions, including this one, to reassemble as far as possible what was there and which was very well indexed before the conflagration. It is not often recognised, but there are quite a few instances when Northern Ireland leads not just in its own area of jurisdiction, but exercises some responsibility in speaking for the island as a whole. There were several occasions when this happened in relation to commemoration of the First World War during the decade of centenaries, when Northern Ireland led not just on its own behalf, but also reflecting the contribution made by people on the whole island. For example, to take just one, in relation to those from Cork to Belfast who fought in the only naval engagement in 1916 at the Battle of Jutland. Much of that credit must go to the Northern Ireland Centenaries Committee, who took a large rather than a narrow view. 2 days ago, I took part by invitation in a remembrance ceremony in Thurles Cathedral, and after Mass there was a procession up to St Mary's Church of Ireland in the same town, where there is a garden of remembrance with many memorials relating to every field of conflict, including Irish UN peacekeepers who died chiefly in the Congo and the Lebanon, but also Irish soldiers who fell in the Korean War serving with US, Commonwealth and British forces. One of the last occasions I met Martin McGuinness, Deputy First Minister, was in the restored part of Richmond Barracks in Dublin. And he was unveiling a memorial bust to Francis Ledwidge from County Meath, a poet, but who was serving in British uniform on the Western Front, and who wrote a famous lament to his friend, a fellow literary man, Thomas MacDonagh, the lament for Thomas MacDonagh. And McGuinness, when he was passing me, just said, "We have a lot to learn." As everyone who works here knows, actual history is full of complexities and does not conform to Procrustean ideological beliefs. And one of the services that historians such as Éamon Phoenix perform is to question the inverted commas certainties that emanate from received but often originally carefully constructed narratives. In his early days, as Taoiseach Enda Kenny once famously said, Paddy likes to know what the story is. But as my wife points out, actually what is even better is to know what the history is. They are not always the same thing, and indeed sometimes even the most determined and earnest revisionism will not succeed in dislodging the comfortable myth. And all of us are guilty sometimes. We much prefer to believe that King Duncan in Shakespeare's Macbeth is murdered in his bed rather than that he fell in the field of battle. Michael Collins is an excellent and enthralling film. I remember a loyalist, not obviously from the political wing of his organisation, telling me in the 1990s that there was one man he really admired in Irish history, and that was Michael Collins. I was not clear that this was an entirely reassuring message. Anyway, some UCD historians were wringing their hands and wondering how long it would take to disabuse their students of some of the fictions it contained. The Northern Ireland PRO plays an important and substantial role in illuminating history both here in Northern Ireland and across these islands. My father, who wrote a great deal on Ireland and Northern Ireland in their most formative years from 1900 to 1949 in particular, also used the PRO when it was in different premises in Balmoral Avenue in South Belfast, which I also visited on at least one occasion. Back in the 1960s, history was treated more warily than it is today, and was viewed as at least potentially containing a lot of unexploded landmines. There was a caution about recent documentary materials and who might be fit and trustworthy to see them. Even today, with certain categories of material, that attitude can still persist. And this not only relates to files, say, on past matters of high security. It is only very recently that south of the border that the decision to open up the Land Commission records, we all remember the film The Field, has been taken, but of course not yet implemented. The PRO Northern Ireland's founding director, D.A. Chart, as a scholar, produced a first edition of the invaluable Drennan correspondence, since expanded as part of the Women's History Project in partnership with the Irish Manuscripts Commission, around the time of the bicentenary of the 1798 rebellion, partly because they wished to highlight the excellent quality of the letters written by Martha McTeer, writing from Belfast to her brother, who was for some time based in Dublin. As has been mentioned, one of the annual highlights of the release of British government papers was the well-informed commentary, Irish papers as well, was the well-informed commentary of Éamon Phoenix on those dealing with Ireland, Northern Ireland and British-Irish relations. The archive and website contains many of his analyses of years between the mid-1980s and the 1990s. And indeed, they also formed the basis of some of his lectures, which are also available on the website and which I look forward over time to listening to. Anyone writing about that period would do well to refresh their memory via what he wrote, in case they might miss some angles. Government papers may only cover part of the story, generally omitting what was conveyed verbally, often in conditions of extreme discretion. I will give one example. On the website, in the context of the release of the 1994 State Papers, there is a report that in the autumn of 1994, weeks after the IRA ceasefire, John Hume suggested to a British official that the Irish government was going too fast with prisoner releases, which was part of its confidence-building measures. And of course he was expressing a perfectly legitimate political point of view. In November in that year, in a quiet bilateral chat at the end of an evening in the British ambassador's residence in Dublin, A most senior officer of the Royal Irish Constabulary, admittedly not from Northern Ireland, told me that they approved of what the Irish government was doing on prisoner releases, but explaining that they were not in a position as yet to do the same. The release of the UK papers under the 20-year rule now occurs significantly ahead of the Irish papers, which some see as giving the UK perspective a head start. But the remedy is in the hands of the authorities south of the border, with important refurbishment work to expand holding capacity underway in the National Archives of Ireland. In the past, papers would not normally see the light of day during the lifetime of a senior official or politician. Nowadays, that has all changed. But there is a comfort for an Irish official that the emergence into the light, even of a negative personal comment made 20, 30 or 40 years ago by a senior British official or diplomat, can sometimes seem an almost positive addition to one's CV. I first came across Éamon's work before I knew him. His 1994 book, Northern Nationalism, Nationalist Politics, Partition and the Catholic Hierarchy, and the Catholic Minority in Northern Ireland, 1890 to 1940, was a masterly account of the impossible dilemmas facing the nationalist community. The most memorable passage in that book, for me, was nationalist leader Cahir Healy's critique in early 1925 of the entire Southern leadership, naming Griffith, De Valera and Collins for failing to understand the Northern situation or the Northern mind, though he also blamed nationalists here for failing to agree a position amongst themselves. Of course, the one leader who had been based in Belfast for a number of years and who did understand the situation was James Connolly, but he was executed in 1916. Éamon would have enjoyed the letter in the Irish Times yesterday by Educational Authority Anya Hyland, explaining in detail why the Collins-inspired policy of the Provisional Free State government about meeting the salaries of any teacher who refused to recognise the Northern Ireland Department of Education, a policy which was never acknowledged and involved circuitous routes. It was, unfortunately, a fiasco with long-term disadvantages for Catholic education, despite being swiftly abandoned after Collins' death, or at least that is Anya Hyland's argument. One of the most valuable services Éamon provided to the reading public was his column in the Irish News entitled On This Day, which picked out from that paper some aspect of its political coverage on the same day of the year, mostly but not always from the first half of the 20th century. Very often he added a comment of his own or background explanation at the end. And there is a sample of these articles in the archive and website, but the Foundation may want to consider over time a much more extensive collection and even issuing it in book form, perhaps arranged chronologically according to the events it is describing in the past. I would have to declare an interest at this point, as on the 30th of January 2007, Éamon published a column on this day with the rather grandiloquent heading, Manza puts Craigavon right on the history of Northern Ireland, quoting from the edition of 30th of January 1938, reporting a letter he had sent to the Daily Telegraph and Morning Post in response to one from Craigavon, rebutting criticisms of another Oxford Don of Anglo-Irish background, Frank Pakenham, later Lord Longford. Nicholas Manza was my father, a young Oxford Don from Tipperary, who had published The Government of Northern Ireland, a study in devolution in 1936, as a sequel to his 1934 book on the Irish Free State. And in the course of research for the Northern Ireland book, he was able to interview the Minister of Labour, J.M. Andrews, and the Attorney General, Anthony Babington, and I have notes of their discussions which are very interesting. Manzo was critical of Craigavon's statement that he valued being Grand Master of the Orange Order more than being Prime Minister of Northern Ireland, and zoned in more specifically on the abolition of PR, which had the effect of preventing smaller groups such as Labour and independent unionists from emerging, thus perpetuating stark unionist nationalist divisions, as well as facilitating gerrymandering at local authority level. I'm paraphrasing Éamon's article. Thankfully, PR has been restored in Northern Ireland except for Westminster elections, and that is not the fault of Northern Ireland. I noted with interest an editorial in this week's Sunday Times Irish edition advocating PR for the US as a means of reducing polarisation. The argument has considerable force, but it is hard to see it being adopted any time soon, if ever, by either of the larger parties in either the US or the UK. Éamon won recognition and public awards for his exceptional services in advancing community relations and peace building, with an annual lecture and a bursary named after him. And as Alice mentioned, an excellent example of this was the exhibition he curated up in Stormont, when neither the Assembly nor the Executive were running, which commemorated 100 years of parliamentary life in Northern Ireland. One might have thought that uniting the parties on this would be a near impossible task, yet Éamon succeeded in doing it while being honest about the history. Back in 1998, at the time of the Good Friday Agreement, it was conventional wisdom that the Nationalist and Republican parties would never go into the Stormont building, and that some other venue would have to be found. On Good Friday morning, after an hour's sleep in an uncomfortable chair in Stormont buildings, I went out for a breath of fresh air and was walking close to the parliamentary buildings when a passing car stopped. It was a senior civil servant who worked in the building and who had once attended Irish special subject lectures given in Cambridge by my father in the 1960s. He asked me if I had ever been in the building, and when I said no, he asked me if he could give me a tour. I accepted, admired what I saw inside, and rapidly reached the conclusion that an alternative seat for the Assembly was not a last ditch that anyone needed to die in. Not that I played any part in the subsequent decision of the nationalist parties to go along with Stormont. Indeed, I am convinced of the likelihood, irrespective of other changes, that the building will serve as a parliamentary seat for a long time to come. While doubts are frequently expressed, not least in opinion polls, that the institutions doubts that they will survive even in the short term, this leaves out of account the absolute determination of the British government that I have observed over 40 years, that the elected representatives of Northern Ireland, and since 1999 like those of Scotland and Wales, will play a part in administering their own country, and that Britain will not permanently relieve them of that responsibility. The South may have been threatened with Crown colony government back in 1920, but that is not the vision for Northern Ireland today. In 2012, the Irish government decided to establish an expert advisory group on centenary commemorations to ensure that a whole series of important but potentially divisive commemorations would be conducted in a non-partisan spirit. Éamon was the vital voice from Northern Ireland who could advise on what was planned here and on the different currents flowing with regard to commemoration. For instance, I remember one time a debate about whether the publication in the South of the 1926 census could be brought forward, because it will throw light on post-revolutionary demographic change. Éamon was able to tell us at once that the detailed forms of the post-establishment of Northern Ireland census, whatever year that was exactly, that they were not kept. So there wouldn't be anything to compare with north of the border. Éamon also played an important part in ensuring that what was going on in the north at the time was incorporated into the overall narrative of the island's history. And a particular example of that was, say, what happened here, particularly in the Belfast area, in the first 6 months of 1922, when violence reached a climax, which was at a different timing from what was happening south of the border. There were fears that the decade, which ran to 12 years, would be divisive. But with one or two exceptions, there was very positive political interest and buy-in in the Republic. I was at a 4-day conference early last year on the civil war in County Kerry, where some of the worst atrocities took place, and was pleasantly surprised that all points of view were listened to and there were no raised voices. Cork University Press has produced tremendous historic atlases of the Irish Revolution and the Civil War, following the format of the much earlier Great Irish Famine Atlas, following the 150th commemoration. I was very sorry to learn yesterday of the early death of Gabriel Doherty of UCC, who was one of the editors. I understand Éamon was involved in the famine commemorations, which of course involved what today is Northern Ireland as well. Éamon's involvement in the decade of centenaries is well reflected in part of the website and archive. And one of the main objectives in terms of legacy was to invest in making documents, particularly those in the Bureau of Military History, accessible to researchers, school students and the general public with the help of the internet. And people can now be much better informed about what family members or volunteers in the community were doing during the period. Amidst all that was serious, there were some amusing and interesting asides that came to the surface. In 1914, Trinity College Dublin seriously suggested that they should be exempted from Home Rule, till this was shot down by Francis Sheehy Skeffington and friends. His widow, Hannah Sheehy Skeffington, whose papers have been published, later claimed that the younger Sean Lamass regretted that votes had been given to women, and I'm not aware of any denial. However, he did appoint a first woman to be secretary of a government department in 1959, Tekla Beer, who was also a Protestant. Much is made of Constance Markievicz being the first woman minister in the revolutionary Dáil government. But when things became settled, the North was way ahead when Deirdre Parker was appointed a minister in 1949. Much was made of a lone woman army officer appointed to the Free State Army. Nearly 60 years were to pass before there was another one. The rebels in the GPO were largely cut off from the outside world. A rumour circulated midweek that the Germans were on the Naas Road. There's also an interesting story that when they were on the top floor, perhaps because the building was under so much fire, a volunteer suggested to Patrick Pearse that they were right opposite the head of the Nelson column, and that with a couple of bullets that he could probably knock the head off, and asked Pearse what he thought, and Pearse said no, it would be a waste of ammunition, and secondly the head might hit or injure somebody down below in the street. so that waited for the 50th anniversary. Prime Minister Asquith came across to Dublin. He was a bit worried about what was going on and visited Richmond Barracks, where the prisoners were held. He asked a young Dubliner what he thought of the rising now. "Well, I think it was a great success, sir." Asquith frowned, deeply puzzled and wanting an explanation. "Well, if it wasn't, you wouldn't be here, sir," came the reply. The devout W.T. Cosgrave wanted bishops in the Senate, or the Catholic hierarchy to have the final say on legislation, but Collins ruled that out firmly. Éamon, in one of his On This Day contributions, referred to rival visions, neither of which came to pass. One, that Ireland would become an example and friend to Catholic peoples everywhere. What Dev used to call Ireland's spiritual empire. And on the other hand, a Protestant Home Rule clergyman who thought that if the South would just throw off the yoke of Rome, there would be nothing to stop Ireland being united. Recently, one Belfast Church of Ireland record argued that it would be impossible to have anything to do with the Republic because it was a pagan country. More seriously, there were woeful misapprehensions with potentially serious consequences. During the First World War, influential unionists were constantly badgering the British government to introduce conscription across Ireland, and we all know what even the attempt achieved. Many Southern nationalists woefully underestimated Ulster Unionist determination to remain apart and thought they could be influenced by economic boycotts or damage to Orange property in Dublin. The British government simply did not care how many big houses in the south were burnt. However, brought into a wider European perspective, a lot worse happened, and a lot more lives were lost in other parts of Europe after the First World War than happened here. Éamon's role as a historian was wholly constructive. He understood the need for a tempered and empathetic understanding of where each side, and there are often more than two, was coming from. One of the aims of the decade of centenaries, in the words of the expert advisory group of which he was a member, was, quote, to broaden sympathies without having to abandon loyalties, and in particular recognising the values of ideals and sacrifices, including their cost. To sum up, Éamon was a superb historian and a wonderful daily communicator. His work underlined the importance of the maximum achievable balance and objectivity, particularly when historical perspectives are very conflicted. He made a major contribution to the success of the centenary commemoration of the new political landscape that emerged in Ireland in the period between 1912 and 23, and bringing people together with very diverse backgrounds and outlooks. I have great pleasure in launching the Éamon Phoenix website and archive. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mansur. I'm now going to invite Paul Connolly to come up and give a brief demonstration of the newly launched website.
Okay, well, thanks everyone, Alice and Dr. Mansur and David and the Minister for summing Éamon up so well. He was, as everyone in here knows, a remarkable character. So we've been asked really to talk briefly about the website and the archive, which was kind of a co-production between myself and Damien Madalena. I'm a sort of recovering journalist, just about. So I sort of worked on the content, on the research side, and Damien was on design and the technical side of things. And our approach, I suppose, was that the website had three main pillars. Number one was to pay attention to this incredible man. Secondly, to start the process of archiving what essentially is all of his remarkable knowledge. And then thirdly, finally, going forward to set out the Foundation's mission, what it is it wants to achieve, and how it will fulfill its aims and objectives. And so the first time, I suppose, I even worked with Éamon, I knew straight away he was something special. He stood up and delivered a straight to camera without any notes, an 8-minute take on the subject that we were dealing with, which is a very, very hard thing to do. It was word perfect, fact perfect, and just everything was incredible. So I knew straight away that he was not just a very special person, but a natural born storyteller, which I think was one of his real gifts, was that he was able to tell a story in such a magnificent way. So a really remarkable character, and a challenge for us to try and create a website that does justice to his legacy. We were very clear from the start that we wanted a clean, modern design to this website, not some sort of oldie worldy vibe, because we're dealing with something historical, because that's, I think, a trap sometimes people fall into. To me, Éamon's mind was very precise and elegant and imaginative and very gracious. He was a very gracious man, and that's what we wanted the website to be. And I think Damien has delivered this with some lovely design here that we'll see very soon. Some other issues, I suppose, we had to deal with was the sheer expanse of Éamon's knowledge and the volume of his output. The amount of stuff that he has put out over the last number of years really is quite incredible. And then the challenge that flows from that was how to break this down into a manageable, easy to navigate experience that people would see online, because if the website isn't right, people will get put off and they'll not explore all the treasures that are in there. Also, one of the challenges was to create a sort of initial archive from which a bigger and better archive would grow over time of this great man's work. And finally, how to tie together that archive and how it might assist the Foundation in its aims and objectives to promote the study of history in a professional way in Ireland to achieve and promote reconciliation. So we'll take you briefly through the website, EamonPhoenixFoundation.com. The home page, of course, sets the tone. This lovely image of Éamon in his study by the late great Hugh Russell, someone else who's very sorely missed from the Irish News. A clean, fresh, contemporary look with a nice modern font, and just a little bit of movement that happens in the site without it being distracting. A clear navigation throughout, and a really, I think, good user experience for people using it. Strong use of images and video across the site. And very quickly on the homepage, you soon get to the Foundation's key objectives, which Alice and Martin have outlined so well. And then keeping on with the user experience of getting you quickly to the archives. Wherever you are on the site, it's good. It's easy to jump through to the archives. So I suppose going into the website itself, that first pillar that I mentioned, Dr. Éamon Phoenix himself. So we have a really lovely biography from Alice about Éamon. Some nice pictures there. There he is as a schoolboy. Remarkable, lovely photograph. Details of his life and his works, and their life together as well, and family stuff, and his career, of course, his interests, which are overwhelmingly historical, of course. So a really lovely piece. The People's Historian, which many people called him, and that's that. Also, if we go on through, there are some testimonials and tributes. Should be. Some they're not displaying, but there's lots of material there from family members, friends and colleagues that for some reason aren't displaying at the moment, but it wouldn't be technology without letting us down. And we've lots of press clippings and obituaries that were written at the time. There was, as everyone knows, a huge outpouring of grief and comment after Éamon died, and lots of it's all reflected there. We haven't captured absolutely everything. There's lots of Twitter tributes and things like that, so by all means, if anybody knows stuff that we have missed, feel free to get in touch. We'll see at the end, but we've email set up, info@EamonPhoenixFoundation.com, and we will do our best going forward to include everything that we have into the archive and build it out and make it bigger and bigger and bigger. What else do we have there? Can we go up to the archive sections? This is it. Scroll up a bit there, Damien. Yeah, here we go.
Sorry about that. Human error, not technical.
There's the testimonials I was talking about. I really encourage you to read them. There's some beautiful ones from relatives and from things. Statements from the Taoiseach there on his passing. There's the social media tributes that I mentioned. We're going to build these out. There's lots there now, but we'd like to build out a lot more to have a full record of Twitter and other tributes that are there. And these are the media reports and sort of press news cuttings that I mentioned earlier. Just the link you can click can take you through to what was written at the time. And these are some of the memories and reflections that were written by family members. Some really, really lovely pieces that are written there, telling stories going back years and really getting to the essence of Éamon. It's lovely stuff, really is. Jumping on to the next pillar, which is the archives. So as I said at the beginning, the plan here is to build the archives out into something more sophisticated, maybe more research orientated, maybe database driven, so that it can be used in an academic purpose. But we started here with, if you go back to the books, Damien, Dr. Manser, for example, mentioned earlier his study on Northern nationalism, nationalist politics, partition on the Catholic minority. Absolutely a groundbreaking piece of work at this time. And if you click on the link, we can see you can go through and buy some of the books that are here. And if you go back, the other famous one of Éamon's was A Century of Gaelic Culture in Adam Glen's Facing the Glen. And again, we show where people can buy these. Some of them are second hand, some of them are quite valuable actually. Then we can go back to videos. He in the last 20 years or so, his video output was absolutely prodigious. Whether it was over Zoom during lockdown or whether it was on YouTube or just events like this being recorded, his video. So there are scores. So we've broken them down. So the first in the series of collections. So the first one is really the series that he did for the Community Relations Council for the decade of centenaries. And we have all the YouTube things there. When you click on these, it brings you through to the YouTube, and you can listen. And there are subtitles as well. And then if we go back down to the Northern Ireland Assembly, the Public Record Office has its own ones that we have. No. If you go back then, next page is a lot of his broadcast. A lot of his broadcast work, we were able to capture quite a lot of it, and some of it is behind paywalls and some of it's not, but we were able to capture quite a lot that we can do here. If you stop there, this is the Peter Heathwood collection at the Cain Archive. Is a very remarkable collection of people who appeared on news broadcasts down through the Troubles. And if you search the archive, Éamon's name comes up quite a lot, and you can read a summary of his contribution. So if something happened, if there was an incident or something on UTV Live, there he was, and you can feel what he said. The Year 21 podcast collection and the Phoenix article, episode 48 that we mentioned there too. More links and lots of other stuff there. We'll not go through it all. The T6 Advisory Committee, I know that Éamon told me he was very proud of. We have a section on his work there. And then just if we get to the On This Day and the State Papers, Damien.
Sorry, I'm a bit slow with the mouse.
So the state papers, very, very important. His analysis of the behind the scenes work that was made public only 20, 30 years later, it really was very, very incisive. So we're trying to collate with the help of the Irish News. They've done a lot of work helping us out, sending us these state papers, and we're going to compile as many as we can and have them there as an easy to find research archive for people. So there's a couple dozens on there now at the moment, and we're going to bring more. And then the other one is the On This Day, which Alice has mentioned. We're hoping to make a daily publication at some point next year. But the On This Day column really reaches back in Irish history such a long, long, long way, and again very vital. And we hope that we will be able to use technology to transcribe these so that it will be searchable in many different formats. And then the third pillar really was about the foundation, the About Us page, which details the work of the foundation that Alice has already mentioned. You know, it's the aims and objectives, the purposes of the charity. So we set out what the key pillars of the charity are. More detail on that. And then information down at the bottom on our patron and the Board of Trustees. And just moving across to the news section. So lots of news stories here of things that the foundation has done already, and we will, of course, as things get up and running, we will build that out and have a lot more stuff there, including a report, a press release from today's events, and some photos and videos of today, including all the speeches, I hope, and social media. The social media sites are up and running too. We'll start to populate them going forward from today. There's a contact us section to get in touch. As I said earlier, please do get in touch with anything we've missed, or suggestions, or links to articles and things like that. And the email address, info@eamonphoenixfoundation.com. And that's really it, a quick canter through the website. And now we're going to go over to Muriel Moore for some music. That's going to be really special. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Éamon often talked to groups, including his hidden history classes, in historic sites such as the Assembly Rooms, Clifton House and Downpatrick Jail, about the last decade of the 18th century, when the Belfast Harp Festival took place in 1792 and the rebellion of the United Irishmen took place in 1798, including the battles of Ballynahinch, of Saintfield and of Antrim. He would ask me to play the music of the time to accompany these talks and to say something about the history of the tunes. These are three of the tunes that I would have played. The first was composed by Turla O'Carolan, who composed several of the tunes played at the Harp Festival. Turla was born in 1670 in County Meath, the son of a blacksmith. When he was 18, he contracted smallpox and was left blind. But a wealthy patron organised for him an apprenticeship to a good harper, and at 21 he was given a horse and a guide and set out to travel throughout Ireland, composing and performing, which he did for almost 50 years. Over 200 of his melodies survive to this day, and this is said to be the first tune that O'Carolan composed, and was documented along with many of the airs played at the festival and others gathered later by Edward Bunting, who was organist of 3 Belfast churches at different times, of St Anne's, Second Presbyterian Church, Rosemary Street, now All Souls Church, Elmwood Avenue, and of St George's High Street. The air is called She Begs, She More.
The next tune is a military drill march called the Pikemen's March. It is said that it dates from the 1798 rebellion, when it was used for training and drilling the pikemen. The ordered set of breaks in the second part of the tune indicate the insertion and removal of the pike from a dummy enemy. The last piece that I'm going to play was a favourite of Éamon's and was played by the winner of the Harp Festival in 1792. The festival was attended by 1 Welsh and 10 Irish harpers, with ages ranging from 15 to 96. 6 of them were blind, including the one female harper called Rose Mooney. Charles Fanning of County Cavan won the first prize of 10 guineas for his playing of this air called the Coolin.
before we're going to finish this afternoon, there's going to be a small clip from Éamon Phoenix himself. Paul and Damien have put together some clips from some of his talks, and we just thought that would be a nice way to conclude, or a special way to conclude today's event. So we're going to play that now.
We're standing here at the ruins of Teeling's Mill in the townland of Poleglass, on Poleglass from the Irish, the Green Hollow. And this Poleglass and the adjoining Bleach Green are a direct link with the Teeling family, one of the most prominent and wealthy Catholic families in Ulster in the late 18th century. But it's also a direct link with the exciting events of 1798 and the great rebellion to establish an Irish Republic on French lines.
We both believed, certainly in the early phase of Carson's career and until John Redmond's death, in the primacy of the British Parliament. John Redmond believed, and Carson believed down to 1910, that Westminster was the surest form of democracy.
When I'm hoping to look at two critical years in modern Irish history, 1922, which, like many in the audience perhaps, I learnt about from folk memory, whispered remarks about dark deeds and definitely hope deferred, and 1972, which I remember, and remember it well enough to know what a horrific year it was.
You can imagine the conferences that must have been held here that sort of tense, hot summer of 1971. You would have had the arrival on the helipad here of British ministers like Reginald Mogling, the Unionist Prime Minister Brian Faulkner, fighting for his political life, police chiefs, military officers, poring over maps and strategic plans.
Actually, I've been doing these papers for 33 years. I'm glad I was only 13 when I started. And of course, we were looking mainly at files from 1991 this year from the Public Record Office here, though of course that's the terminal date on files. So some of the more interesting files.
That's just a little compilation of some of Éamon's talks. So really, just to conclude, I had the pleasure of introducing Éamon at many of those PRONI's, we call them Secret from the Files events, and they began almost a decade ago. Éamon's probably poured over more government files from the 1960s to the 1990s than many civil servants have, which is an admirable feat. Although introducing Éamon was always an unenviable task, because I was always aware that, could you hurry up and get on, because really we want to hear from Éamon. So I'm not going to keep you any longer. And Éamon always provided a masterful and insightful account from the records, and it's fantastic they're now going to be available. So today's launch of the website and archive brings Éamon's writings and lectures together in one place for the public, students and researchers to explore, to be challenged and continue to be inspired. I just want to say a sincere thanks to our contributors, to Alice Phoenix, to Dr Martin Manser, to Paul Connolly and Damien Madalena and Muriel Moore. And I'd also like to thank some of the PRONI staff, or all the PRONI staff who've been involved today, with Stephen and Lindsay and Grace and Gavin and Janet and others who've all contributed. Thank you so much for showing your support to the Dr Éamon Phoenix Foundation by being here today, coming out today, and thank you for joining us. And that brings the event to a conclusion. If we could just show our appreciation to all of the speakers.